In my experience, I'm just giving you these introductory words, my experience in both the yeshiva and the rabbinic world, or what do you call it, in the rabbinate, or meeting all types of people, B'nai Torah, there are some that hold in contempt people that are only dealing with Agadata. They just write it off, which is wrong. It's absolutely, I think it's not a Torah idea, because Agadata, the fact that it's included in a good portion of Shas, Chazal, when it was edited, you have that, or what we call later on collected as Ein Yaakov, is an essential part of Torah. So there should never be ignored, and sometimes that's the greatest vehicle of communication to other people. I mean, you know, the Avreche HaKelel, where you're concentrating on learning, on expanding your learning, Havana learning, your knowledge of learning, your ability to paskin, but at the same time, in our time, the Kelelim are a vehicle for a conduit to communicate with the communities that you're living in, and that's what you're doing. You're spreading the word of Torah, and many times it's through the vehicle of drush, of, as they used to say in Yiddish, a good word, one good statement sometimes open up a whole field of understanding to someone who normally doesn't care so much about a halacha of a particular deen. But once he hears that, it becomes worthwhile, so then he's able to accept the other things. I'm saying that as a matter of akdama. Now here's another important point, and this is the way I would understand. If you had to tell, let's say, an uneducated Jewish layman, you had to introduce him to Talmudic learning. Now what would be one of the ways of introducing him? You know, one of the best ways is the Agoda Shel Pesach. The Agoda Shel Pesach is a chelik like of Torah Shebal Peh, and it's popular. It's been translated in every which way. It has so many different commentaries, but the very text of the Agoda is a Torah Shebal Peh. And why am I saying this? I mean, I'm emphasizing it. It's not taken out of thin air. That there is in the Siddur of Reb Amram Gaon, which was the original Siddur that has come down to us through the centuries and has gone into different nuschos, Sfarad, and this is Sfarad, Ashkenaz, and all the different nuschos. But the Siddur of Amram Gaon quotes a tshuva for Reb Natronoi Gaon, who says that as far as the Agoda Shel Pesach is concerned, let's say we know it says in the Torah that you have to you have to tell the story. So let's say you take in the modern times someone who's not knowledgeable about Torah, about learning, but they're having a seder. You know, a seder by even non-observant Jews in different degrees. Most people have a seder. There's no question about it. The proof of it used to be if you lived in, especially in New York City, on Erev Pesach, you had to be out on the highways, which happened to me once, and I'll just tell you, the traffic on Erev Pesach was super extraordinary, and the expressways out to Long Island, into Brooklyn, into Manhattan. On an Erev Pesach, it wasn't a non-Jewish holiday like you say on Thanksgiving, people going to airports or so forth. This was Erev Pesach. So how do I find that out? Unfortunately, I once had a levaya out on Long Island when I was a Rav in New York. So the levaya somewhere was around 11 o'clock in the morning. We got out to Long Island. Then coming back, it was unbelievable. But I got home barely before Mincha on Erev Pesach, Mincha in the shul. I ran into the house, of course everything was ready, and ran off to shul. And then after davening, I went to the Seder. So what am I trying to express? That all types of people were traveling to their families for Seder. They were going out to Long Island, they were coming into Brooklyn at the grandparents, the parents, huge traffic. So those people will say, well, what's the Seder? They know they eat matzah, they have bitter herbs, the family comes together and they tell the story. What story? They tell the story of the Exodus. If they just tell the story of the Exodus, that the Jews were enslaved in Egypt and they went out, just like that, without the interpretation of the Agoda, so Rav Gedalia Dov says, you're not fulfilling the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. You must understand it the way the Chazal analyze it. So I would say, so that would be an introduction to any in other words, a layman who's not familiar with Torah Shebaal Peh. Here is a striking example how Chazal interpret things. You have all the mises of the Tanoim, Mesub B'nai Brak. You have the interpretation of Arba Bonim. You have every interpretation on text in the Chumash. It's Torah Shebaal Peh. They're taken from the Chiltas, from Sifri, from Midrashim. This is Torah Shebaal Peh. So he says in very severe terms, quoted by Rav Gedalia, that anyone who does not do that and so forth is worthy of being put into Chayim. Strong language. In fact, who quotes that? I recommend, this is a very excellent Agoda. If you have the Agoda of Reb Reuven Margolis Zal. Who was Reb Reuven Margolis? Reb Reuven Margolis was a great rabbinic master who lived originally from Galicia. He was not a Lithuanian, a Litvak, or for the Litvish yeshivas or anything else. He came out of Galicia, and he came. He had Aliyah in Eretz Yisrael, and his position in Eretz Yisrael was not in any rabbinic post. He was the librarian of the Library of Tel Aviv. But they once had a write-up years ago about him. I'm spending time talking about him to recognize who he was. They write up in the old. There used to be a newspaper, weekly, Panim El Panim, and by Pinchas Peli was the editor. Pinchas Peli was a great Hebrew writer who wrote many of the drushes of Yosef Ber Soloveitchik of the Rav. Anyhow, so he had the title of that edition was the Habaki HaYoser Godli, the greatest Baki. When he says Baki, just doesn't mean Shas Bavli or Shalmi, so forth. The whole Kabbalistic literature. In fact, he has a full-fledged commentary, an edition, if you want to buy an edition of the Zohar, which everybody should have. It's a major source. You get it with not only the original edition, a commentary of the Chidor, but also Reb Reuven Margolius's commentary on it and the Nuschos. Well, he has a perush on the entire Zohar. So he has an Agoda, and he brings this element. Agoda is called the Ber Miriam. That's what is the name of his mother. But he has interesting. It's both a likut and it's a perush. So one of the Hagdamas he talks about. He quotes this Shuvah for Reb Gedalia Dov. Look at the language when he quotes it. Ukvar kosov Rav Gedalia Dov ki mi shemesaper b'yetzias Mitzrayim umedalei al elo hadrashas. He skips those drushes. He says Jews were in Egypt, they were enslaved, bitter, this, that. Don't give any of these drushes. He says, Ain't tzorach leima shelo yotza. He's not yotza the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Elo kol misha eisikein minhu. Strong language. He's like an unbeliever. You will get many times people say, what's Passover? Festival of Freedom. You know, I would say it's a lot of baloney. You know, I mean, there's a Festival of Freedom. What? You know, it sounds like Abe Lincoln, the Emancipation Proclamation. He freed the slaves. It's more than that. That's what it's telling us. It's a whole total experience as interpreted Chazal, and it's still with us. The very fact that every single day of the year we say Zechi Yetzias Mitzrayim. So he says he's Minu. The cholik leiv, he has a divided heart. He's saying, "V'keifer v'divrei chachamenu zal, u'beiza divrei Mishnah v'Talmud." Shaming Mishnah v'Talmud, v'chayovim kol hakehilos l'nadoisu lahavdilo mikal Yisrael. And that's quoted Siddur Rav Gedalia Dov. That's what he calls it. Strong language. So I'm not going into the strength of the language, but how important it is that we talk about the Haggadah Shel Pesach. It is involved. You have to get the original Perushim of Chazal, and then everything else develops like anything else. You have a rabbinic text. You have your own commentaries. That's why we have so many Haggadahs and so forth. There used to be an old joke, the Darshanim used to say, how come every year they print new Haggadahs? Why do they have to print new Haggadahs? Why didn't they have the Haggadah from last year? So the answer was an anecdotal joke. He says maybe the Russia of last year became a tzaddik. It became Chacham. And they changed their status. So you got to have a new Haggadah. Hopefully people will change their status for the better. So that's a sort of introduction on that. Now one of the, I've just taken down for this particular session, not gone straight with the Haggadah, but the Haggadah says the focal part, but there are a lot of texts, psukim in the Chumash, that of course deal with Tzias Mitzrayim, that lend themselves to focus on Pesach, have a lot of extended meanings if you want to extend it. One of them is, one of the things that I jotted down was about the Shaila, the difference between, there's a lot of things we gloss over, but the introductory aspect of Pesach, the way it is in the Chumash, is a Korban Pesach. It was a Korban, what they call the Paschal Lamb. Korban Pesach, and there are a lot of drashas that come out of that parsha. We're not going into all the details. There's a whole parsha that talks about Zos Chukas HaPesach. These are the laws of the Korban Pesach. So the Korban Pesach, there was a difference always, and that is discussed in the Mishnah, in Psochim, of difference between Pesach Mitzrayim and Pesach Deus. The Pesach Mitzrayim, you can have chametz, not Pesach Deus. And also, there's a difference between where later on when our people came into Eretz Yisrael, they built the Beis Hamikdash, they were makriv the Korban Pesach. It gives differences between the Korban Pesach of Mitzrayim and the Pesach of Deus. So one of the differences is based on the Chumash text that ve'achaltem oisei v'chipozon. You have to eat. They told the Jewish, Moshe Rabbeinu was told to Hashem, you have to eat the Korban Pesach in haste, and it's described the haste. You have to have you have to be all dressed up, makelchem b'yetchem. You have to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. That's the way it is. And to go the Exodus, Yetzias Mitzrayim. In fact, there used to be later, it's brought in minhagim, that many times and like my late mother-in-law, whose father was a Rav, was Sarata B'Rav, Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Sapir, at the Seder used to follow the minig. He used to take like a sack and put matzah on it, and he used to walk, as if to say that was the Sa'or was Shuvos V'Simlo Seichem. The sourdough was bound up in your clothes, to go through that experience, but it was in haste, as if you have to go. But in the future, there's no deen of chipazon. So what is the theme involved? So the major theme, which is brought in many different sforim, and Hasidic sforim, it's also brought, I don't know whether it's even possible to get that sefer, the sforim of this mechaber who lived in the United States, who was a literature of, and seemingly originally from Muslim movement. There was a Rav in Denver, Colorado, Rav Yehuda Leib Ginsburg Zal. So he wrote many, I would say, useful from a standpoint of being in the rabbinate, or useful for drushes, for ideas. He seemed to have a grasp. He wrote, first of all, a sefer on the entire Chumash called Yalkut Yehuda. What is Yalkut Yehuda? He has the text of the Chumash, Chamisha Chumshei Torah, and then he has selected midrashim or mekayros from Gemaras, whether it's Bavli, Yerushalmi, or even from Rishonim. or other Meforshim. On some of them, he has his own Perush. He explains them in a very, I would say, almost useful way that if ever I have a symposium and people ask, what are some good sforim for making drushes or so forth, I say, get yourself a Yalkut Yehuda. It's in 5 halakim. They reprinted it a few times. If it's still available, I highly recommend it. He also wrote on Shisha Sidrei Mishnah, he called it Musar HaNaviim. So on the Mishnah, I only have the 2 volumes that go up from Zoyim, Moed, Noshin, Ezekim. I don't know whether they ever published Kochi Mataris, but on every Mishnah, practically every Mishnah, he has a thematic interpretation above and beyond the halacha. He comes out with it. He has an amazing gift to do that. Then there's another sefer that they reprinted in Eretz Yisrael, a couple of volumes, Musar HaNaviim, where he starts with Yeshua, Shaftim, and Shmuel.
What was the one on Mishnah called?
Musar HaMishnah. In fact, his Perush on Pirkei Avos is called Musar HaMishnah, but he printed it in a separate volume called Keser HaShabbos.
It's on Pirkei Avos.
Keser HaShabbos is another sefer of his. It has the Musar HaMishnah on Pirkei Avos, which is great, and he has a Perush on Shir HaShirim, on the Midrashim on Shir HaShirim, which are wonderful Perushim about Shabbos and so forth. So he lived in Denver, Colorado. And so he writes, one of his biggest, this interesting thing about community unity. He writes, the one that gave him a great deal of, seems financial and moral support was a conservative rabbi called Kauvar, Kauvar, who was a very traditional conservative, old-time conservative rabbi that gave him a great deal of support. He was able to publish all these sforim. So in the Yalkut Yehuda, in the Yalkut Yehuda, he explains, not the Yalkut Yehuda, but in the Musar HaMishnah, he explains the difference, why was the essential aspect of chipazon in contrast to the future. Because in the future, Yeshayahu Novi says, we have it included in the davening too. I think on Matzoi Shabbos, it says, Ki b'simcha seitzo, v'lo b'mnusa. You're not going, in other words, when there will be the Geula Shlema, he's saying, you'll go out with joy. You'll take your time. You won't be running from something. You know, when they talk about kibbutz golius, there are 2 ways of looking at it. Let me just add this little addendum. When in benching, what do we say? Ho'achman u'yolifenu komemios liartzenu. That's a statement there, and we have it from the Torah. But and at the bracha before the Torah says, "Va'olech eschem komemios." I will lead you out standing up straight. And what does that signify? Well, it signifies an important concept. The Holocaust, the most horrible event in the 20th century, and later the birth of the state of Israel, came out from many of the refugees that were running away from someplace, escaping. They were plating, Shevas HaPleita. They were running away from something rather than going towards something. You know, the idealistic Zionists were going towards something, you might say. They were not so, but even then, they kept talking about even if he was a secular Zionist, they described the Galut, the Gola, and all the bad. They're running away from it. So, however, Hashem says the ultimate Gula will be V'olech eschem komemios. Now, as if to say, standing up straight. So, with the Bar Ber Leibowitz, the commentator of Rosh Yeshiva, once said, he said, you know what? Mashiach will come from America. Why will Mashiach come from America? Because in America, he said, there is the financial power. There's money. People walk straight, and Oni is bent over. He comes pleading with hat in hand. He's knocking on the door. He's the Meshulach whatever he is. But Olech Eschen Komemiyas, you'll walk into Eretz Yisrael, the Mashiach who is standing up straight. He said, I used that many times in a drasha. It's quoted from him. Mashiach wird kommen from America, because and it's based on the Medrash when it says by Kerach, es kol hayakum. You know, when he was swallowed up with all of those who made the machlekas, what else was swallowed up? All of his money. Remember, Kerach was very rich. It's called, all was swallowed up into the ground. So Komemiyus represents someone who has mastery of, you say, physical resources and walking straight up. I also use the term in a drasha, walking tall. That used to be the name of a moving picture. You know, a 6.5-foot sheriff in the South. So walking tall. Jews will walk tall, not just come out of the concentration camps. That's the idea. So the future is supposed to be that way. So what is the difference? So I have analyzed what he says in Musa Mishnah. It has to do with, I'm using the term, it's my term, has to do with the crisis in faith. There are two ways. One of the big problems today, and this is my word, the way I'm saying it, looking at what I've seen in recent literature, especially in criticism of book reviews about Jewish topics and so forth, you have in the secular world, or the world that is not observant, and their approach to religion or to Torah is a negative one. They don't regard it as a reality. They're saying it's only attachment to the history of the Jewish people. In other words, why are you Jewish? Well, I have grandfathers. Or I used to hear from I once heard in Rhode Island, there was a man running for, we're talking about the election year, there was a Jewish man, a very rich man, that Walter Sundlund was his name. Sundlund was the name. He convinced himself he should run to be senator of the state of Rhode Island. At that time, his opponent was this famous Senator Theodore Francis Green. He was over 80 years old in the Senate, and fixed in a democratic machine, because Rhode Island was a democratic machine, from the mayor to the governor, then to the senator. That's the way it went. Always was a Democrat. That's the way it went. And Green was part. So he, with all his wealth, he's a Republican, is going to run against Green. So when he once came to meet with the rabbis, because he was friend with a certain rabbi whom he used to give a free car, automobile all the time. He had they used to have LaSalle cars with the Chrysler. So he said, whoa, I'm always connected with the Jewish people. My great-grandfather was a rabbi in this town in Lithuania and so forth. But the question is, who are you? What's your faith? What's your connection with the Jewish people? Because you had a great-grandfather that, could learn a Blad Gemara or could daven in the morning. Is that your claim to Judaism? Of course, in today's world, it's a bit of a claim, because some people have gone even away from that. So the thing is this: when the Jewish people, this is what he points out, the Musar Mishnah. This is background for this text. The Musar Mishnah points out when Moshe Rabbeinu came to the Jewish people, and remember, it's after 210 years of slavery or being sunk into the culture of Egypt, surrounding, overwhelming culture. It's hard for us even to describe it, because I'll say almost mentes shari tumah, almost steeped into the immorality or lifestyle of Egypt, which was attractive and so forth, even in the state of slavery, whatever it was. And so when he comes to speak to the Jewish people, he's saying to them the following. He uses the expression in the Pasuk when he says the following: Lech v'osafta ziknei Yisrael v'yomartu aleim. Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, when you first speak to the Jewish people about redemption, the going out, tell them Hashem Elokei Avosechem nira Elai, because Moshe Rabbeinu was doubtful how is he going to convince the Jewish people that, they're so enveloped by the culture of Egypt, slavery, they've almost given up hope, whatever it is. He said, tell them that the Lokei, he say, Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Lemor, Poko, Pekadati. He mentions to them, not that you're about your faith, about your ancestors. In other words, you have a connection. You had a grandfather, great-grandfathers, Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, you come from great yichus, it's time to get out. But their personal faith really was not of any great amount at that particular time. In fact, the Torah reminds us later on at Kriyas Yamsuf, there was what we call in the existential philosophical terminology, a leap of faith. Vayaminu b'Hashem. That's where it said that they believed in Hashem at that time when they saw it came to an important point. So their connection then was only through ancestral approach. We can say today, some people, they will come observe Pesach, at least a way, because, well, their grandfathers observed Pesach, my parents observed all year round, they might not have be kosher. Observe Pesach. Used to be people, they used to have that. They might, all year they didn't keep kosher. Came Pesach, they wouldn't have a scrap of chametz in the house. They wouldn't even drink milk. I mean, when I grew up, there were people that all year round they didn't observe kosher, didn't observe Shabbos, and so forth. Came Pesach, and you told them that you drink milk kosher Pesach. Oh, that's terrible. How could you drink milk on Pesach? They had all the chumras, everything else. But the rest of the year, on Friday night, it used to be an apartment house we used to live. There's one woman used to have Jewish room mahjong parties. But when she knew her old mother was coming, and when it was already Shabbos, she ben shlit. My mother, all that Shalom said, it was after Shabbos. She was Machal Shabbat. She didn't want her mothers to see that she didn't ben shlit, so she lit the candles. But I'm just saying, there was this twisted attitude. It was only connected. It was not a personal belief. It was only, I would say that's a madrega. That at least is something. Because today, there are people today have no attachment whatsoever. In fact, it just occurred to me, isn't this Senator Sanders Jewish? What's his connection to Jews? I haven't heard anything about him. Ask him about does he go to shul? Does he even go to a temple? Does he go to a seder? What is his connection? That should bother a lot of people. I think it bothers lahavdil even goyim. Goyim don't like. Goyim that at least have some religious connection don't like a Jew that doesn't have a religious connection. Gotta have a story, then personal experience, just to mention such an attitude. In 1948, when I was still in yeshiva, it was a year before I got smicha, the fellows used to go out yomi nehoyim to daven in communities, to speak, to daven, to do what we call the rabbinic requirements. So at that time, I was given a post in Dunkirk, New York. Where's not Dunkirk on the famous escape, but 40 miles south of Buffalo, there's a town called Dunkirk on Lake Erie. At that time, Lake Erie was not completely polluted. It was the largest whitefish fishing port in the Great Lakes. That was its main industry. Nearby, up in New York State, that's where it is, as I say, was the wine growing, still is, the wine growing kind of the New York wines. Manischewitz was up there, then it was Star Wine Company. Kedem was just about even barely getting started. But that was the place. So Dunkirk had a little Orthodox synagogue where they had davening. So I was asked to go there and take care of, here's what I had to do. I davened Shachris, I layin, I blew shofar, and I gave drushes. Baal Musaf they got from Rochester, a fellow that came in and davened. So that was what I did. So what did I hear? There was a very frum Jewish woman there. One Jewish woman was married to a man that originally had a good background. He was like a maskil, learned in Hebrew, Ivrit, everything else. So they told me a story about their town. There was a Jew that was keeping open on Yom Kippur. He was keeping his store open on Yom Kippur. The Goyim shun the place later. They wouldn't become his guy. They say if he can't even observe his holiest day of the year, that's what he understood it, we don't trust him. He's not trustworthy. That's a concept, so you have to understand, that's why, you see today, it doesn't seem to matter that much, but deep down, it should mean, it means where's the person's emunah. So coming back to this situation here is, so what is the difference? So at least in Mitzrayim, the Jews had a connection, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and a Zeta, a grandfather, a father, or somebody had a connection with Yiddishkeit, so you emotionally move them to do an act of geula, to become autonomous as Jews, to try to go to a personal faith. But in the future, the idea is that Ma'asivchem Elokei Yisrael, when it's talking about who will gather you, the God of Israel, means that you will recognize Hashem. And that's what we have. In other words, personal faith. In fact, there's an interesting, I would say it's a sort of a anecdote or statement in the name of the founder of the Navarro Yeshivas. I heard it once behind about emunah, about faith. Why do you do mitzvahs? Remember, the Navarro Yeshivas were revolutionary in their the way they got established. Their founder was with Yosef Horowitz. He was an extreme person of great emunah and what you say, dveikus and piety. He founded that stream of Mussar. Mussar, you have different, if you know the history of the Mussar movement, there's the Mussar of the Altar of Slobodka that originally started with Rav Shaul Salanter, but Slobodka Mussar, which talked about godless ha'adam. You have Reb Simcha Zissel of Kelm, which talked about the nature of the Yetzer Hara, how to avoid it and do things like that, strict discipline. So the Varadok suddenly came out with doing things that is almost in a state of martyrdom. They used to have targilim, tests. When he founded the yeshiva, he said, go to a Russian train station in the afternoon when it's crowded with goyim, mincha. And they used to have a mansion in the time of Tsarist or in the time of the upheavals of the Bolshevik Revolution. They're davening mincha in the train station. That was a test. Amazing thing. In fact, I heard this from somebody that participated in a different kind of a test. There used to be a Rav here in Chicago when he came here, Rav Fishkin Zal. He had learned in the Navarodoki Yeshiva there in Pinsk, near Minsk, there in Belarus, and so forth. So once the Rosh Yeshiva said, here's your test, he told the whole group of a minyan, he says, at night, go to the next shtetl. Now, to walk in Europe, and that area is mostly woods, forests, so they walked at night, they came there, it was way almost before dawn. They went into the Beis Medrash, and you see what this is a test of your emunah, what's going to happen to you. So they went in there, and they didn't know anybody in the place, and they started to daven there and so forth. So a woman in the town, as you say, a Yidden, heard somebody in the Beis Medrash. She went in, and she said, "Ooh, yeshiva bachrim." So she ran back. And within an hour, they brought food. They brought them all kinds of things. So later on, the Rosh Yeshiva said, you see the test? If you have emunah, you're going to get, even without, things are going to happen as long as you dedicate yourself to Yiddishah. So, in fact, the Chofetz Chaim called the Navarodoki Yeshiva people, he says, the Tsar has Cossacks, who are the most extreme devoted members of the Cossack, of the Tsar's army, like the Marines. They're the most powerful. He says, Beta Shalel has Cossacks, the Navarodoka. So what did Rav Yozel say? What did the Navarodoka founder say? He says, you know why I wear a beard? He said, not because my grandfather wore a beard and my father wore a beard, because I want to wear the beard. I believe in it. It's not just a belief from them, it's my own personal, dedicated belief. So this is the difference, that in the future, there will be such a great leap of faith that Jews will believe in Hashem, not because their Zayda did it or the father did it, which is a madrega. I'm not taking away from that. Baruch Hashem, we have that attachment. But if you have your own personal strength of belief, you'll be able to do that. So that's the way I interpret. So that would be the difference between the Pesach Mitzrayim and the Pesach Losid Lova. So if you were giving such a drasha this particular week or so from Parshas HaChedesh, in other words, HaChedesh Hazeh Lachem, take control of your belief. You have a hischachus, have a renewal that you are in charge. It's lechem, it's your own possession. That's what you should do. So that's one element, developing the idea of the Musar HaMishnah. Now here's another idea that comes from a Hasidic source. Now, it should be understood when it comes to drush or so forth, one of the great sources of drush is to look into Hasidic Sforim. They had a tremendous koyach in drushes, more than others. I mean, they talk about the pasuk as a vehicle for expressing an idea. Like, just to use the founder of Hasidus, who's Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, in the 18th century, was supposed to have said, to encourage Jews to become frum, he says, Mibsorcha al tisale. Now, generally, in halacha, Mibsorcha al tisale means if you have a relative and you have some people to give tzedakah, you have to give the relative first. Mibsorcha lo tisale. That's a phrase from Yeshaya Novi. It's a halacha, brought in the Shulchan Aruch. They said to the Hasidim, there are certain physical needs that you have to have. In other words, to enjoy things. When you, he encouraged them to make brachas, but you have to have food. Enjoy your food. Have a good shalom. Have all these great, good things. So mipsorcha, from your flesh, don't hide the needs of your flesh as long as you channel it in a spiritual direction. So that's an example of a Hasidic interpretation. Now the Sfas Emes says something about the Gulas Mitzrayim, which is rather fascinating. You know, the pasuk there. What?
Do you want a drink of water?
What? Yeah, you can get it. I'm not thirsty yet, but you might as well get it out. Nipsorcha lo tisala. Okay. Well, wait.
Twersky quoted, I think, from Shimon Shkop, that
What?
I think Frank Twersky quoted from Shimon Shkop
That what?
that the side of Magen Avraham, that I'm going to chaysim with Magen Avraham, with the schos of Avraham,
Right.
is the Moshe
Chol
Mashiach.
Chaisman.
Chaisman is that in the Moshe Mashiach, the eventual Gula is going to come from people like Avraham. They didn't have a Messiah. It's just from them. But he said Bali Tshuva or whatever they used.
So, thank you.
Amen.
Now here's another idea. When it says in the Torah, I think it's in Parshas the Eva, V'otzeisi eschem mitachas sivlos Mitzrayim. It might be the Eva or both. I will take you out from under. What does sivlos mean? Sivlos means like the burden. Sevel, the burden. The people that are enslaved have the burden of work or of slavery. So when you know what the Sfas Emes says, and here's the Hasidic turn. This is the Nakuda. He's saying that you're in a state of slavery, and you're in a state of being surrounded by all of the assimilating forces of Mitzrayim, and the idea is, in modern, and I would add the term, I heard it the first time I came to Eretz Yisrael, and you had to go through customs, so it took a long time. This was in 1971. So there was a woman, she was probably already a Ezrach, a citizen of Israel. So she said out in Ivrit, She said, the hasiman hamuvak sha'atem be'eretz Yisrael savlanut. You got to have patience, because to get through the customs where they were examining packages. So it means that you have patience. So you're able to bear up under the burden. He said that was not good. If you're getting used to assimilation, if you're getting used to the Egyptian culture, Hotzesi eschem, I pulled you out from under that. That was time, because this was what was happening. And you see that even in events in the Chumash. Many times when there the Dor HaMidbar comes, oh, Zacharnu, remember the good old days in Egypt. What kind of good old days? They were getting so used to it that even in state of slavery, they were able to bear up on it. It's as if Hashem had to tear them out. In fact, one of the Masholim in the Mechilta, my late father-in-law Zal, was quoted as saying that when he got his rabbinic post in Europe at the time in 1913, he used this Mechilta, Lama Yisrael Daima. What did the Jewish people compare to? It's a Mechilta. It says, Lo Uber HaNishmat Mimei Imo, like a fetus that is wrenched from the mother. It had to be detached. In other words, like a Caesarean operation. They had to take out the Jews from almost being swallowed up into the mother of Egypt, the mother of assimilation, of attraction, whatever that held. So I took you out of that. And sometimes this is a very important point if on a modern, how do you relate it to modern times? Because what a lot of Jews today have assimilated to the point where they're attracted by all of the things that you have, like say in the USA. People have lost contact with what a Shabbos means and everything else. They're starting to, they got used to it. It became the idea, you can ask many suburban families, what do you do on Saturday morning? We go to the mall. Or if it's a nice summer, spring and summer, we go out to the golf course. We go down here swimming to the lake, or we do all these sorts of things. They got quiet because the prevailing culture is doing that, so they get used to that. They accept it. That's in a more, not in such a, I would say, evil way, but because they become assimilated to a type of lifestyle. But sometimes you're in a place where corruption is the way of life, where you can't do anything getting through government without bribes. So the people say you're not going to get anywhere. You have to come up with the right, you have to know the right people, you have to pass the right money, you have to give this one this amount, you have to give one this gift, you have to be able to recognize that. They'll do you a favor, but you have to be ready to do the favor, just like an underworld mafia situation. After a while, people get used to doing that. You know, in Europe, when Jews lived in the Tsarist Empire, in many of the towns and that were governed by different people, bribery was a way of life. In Yiddish, they called it chabar. If you know you pass the money to the certain official, government official, you could get whatever you wanted to. So that was a way of life. Otherwise, you were a dirty Jew. You were looked down with contempt. You didn't have anything. You could be driven out from a place where it wasn't supposed to be. But if you came up with a bribe, you could survive. So that was the way of life. Unfortunately, when Jews came to America, it took quite a while for them to get used to American government, democracy, but unfortunately, in other places, the democratic governments and political machines, we know that there's corruption. Every now and then there's a scandal comes out. So that's something we should not get used to. We should not allow things of that sort to take place. Or if there are things that happen in a community and people say, well, we can't do anything about it, I don't want to do anything about it, I don't want to get involved. In other words, I'm just savlanut. I'll just be patient, I'll just let things go that way. You can't do that. You have to make a move to do that. It's just like some people started a good example would be is how this is an example that came to the U.S. Supreme Court, had to do with Shabbos. You know, in certain states, up through the 50s or so forth, in New York there were the blue laws. I don't know whether you ever heard of that. The blue laws were in the state laws of the state of New York, you could not open a commercial establishment on Sunday. You had to shut down. And if you opened, you would be fined. The police would come and write you a ticket. It wasn't a criminal act, but it was a misdemeanor. You had to pay a fine. And Jews that were Shomer Shabbos, they had to keep closed Shabbos. And then come Sunday, would it be a day of great profit or so forth, they couldn't open up. So there's all sorts of things happen. Some places the police look the other way. Why? They probably pass them a few dollars or there. You know, it's all the blue laws. Now, how was these laws broken down by the U.S. Supreme Court? Of course, it happened through the state of Pennsylvania. In Philadelphia, and I knew one of the people that was involved, there were 5 merchants that were Shomer Shabbos in the south side of Philadelphia, which was one of the old Jewish neighborhoods near the downtown, and they started keeping, they were on Shomer Shabbos. So when the Pennsylvania blue laws sent the cops came and gave them fines, they went to court. The court said it's a law of the state, we can't do anything about it. They appealed it to the U.S. Supreme Court on the basis of constitutional freedom of religion. They won. It's a famous case of those 5 merchants. So that broke open, also that these are Jews that did not want to take savlanut. They moved, although it cost them money, it cost them all sorts of things, fines, but they got through, they protested. So an example that sometimes that sivlos, that type of, in other words, tolerance is a very important ingredient in maintaining a stable society. You have to be tolerant of other people, other rights and other things. But there's certain type of things that are intolerable. And that's the case if something is intolerable. It doesn't allow me to pursue my own religious rights without and doing anything against somebody else. So that broke open. I'll just give you an example of how things can be done. And that's what happened in different communities where somebody, let's say someone came to America and so forth and decided he's going to be a Shomer Shabbos regardless. And although people said you can't do that in this country, you have to allow, you have to go along with the flow. Or even if you want to keep by yourself, you have to don't make any protest about others doing it. But nevertheless, there were some people that were that strong. They maintained Shmir Shabbos and they affected others. Even and they became successful businesses and so forth. I don't know whether you know that. I know it for a personal fact. The famous billionaire family Reichman of Toronto. You heard of them, the most international billionaires. And they live mostly from out of Toronto. Their company is Olympia York. If you ever see a company, Olympia York, they have a lot of property down in Chicago. They almost bought the Sears Tower, which is now the Willis Tower. So I once had to deal with somebody that was a contractor, a non-Jewish contractor who was seeking Gaius. So he had a contract with Olympia York. They were building downtown New York is a place called Battery City. If you ever, in Manhattan, Battery City is a development of tremendous high-rise apartment houses, upscale with businesses, and in fact they have bridges over the street, over the highway of the West Side Highway that goes. It's downtown, not far from the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. That's their development. So when they were building that in the contracts, it says that even them, although it was a Goyish company, no work on Sabbath and holidays, and they spelled it out to the last details. That's how they conducted from the very beginning, and they were matzliach. In London, they built what they call the Thames Wharf. They rehabbed the whole Thames River front. That was their project. For a while, they almost went bankrupt on it, but then they revived it. It's a tremendous production. So it shows that some people did not accept the savlonut. So that's an example of that. Jews have to understand, have to stand up for their own rights and so forth and go forward. I mean, you have these challenges. So, but if you start allowing it, you're going to become assimilated too. It's going to affect you after a while. Because, you know, that's what happened with some parents that were Shomer Shabbos and their children became a Chalei Shabbos. Because they regarded their parents as some sort of a relic, a dinosaur from another country. That's where you can have Shmiras Shabbos, but you have to be able to tolerate it, and you can do it. After a while, the person himself becomes a Mechal Shabbos. That's how it goes from one thing to the other. So the Sfas Emes says, that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did for the Jewish people. I took you out from being able to tolerate the immorality and the way of life of Egypt just in time before you sank into that oblivion of assimilation, or what they call acculturation, whatever it is. Now, here's something else that I found. In fact, it's the first time I really saw it, but interesting. There's a minhag. You know, there's an interesting Haggadah, which you might be able to get an example of a Hasidic Haggadah. This is the Haggadah Shel Pesach of the Belzer. You know, Belzer Chassidus is a very powerful Hasidic movement. In fact, Reb Sholem, the original Belzer Rebbe, was a Talmud of the Chayz of Lublin in the early 19th century, who had one of his Talmudim was the Chedushi Harim, from whom comes Ger Chasidus, a lot of the Hasidic dynasties. So Belz was one of them. The Belz distinguished themselves with not only with their dvekas, with their dedicated to observance, but in learning. All the Belzer Rebbeim were great Talmidei Chachamim, were, you know, Gedalia Torah, which doesn't always go through for all in Hasidic. There are different levels and so forth. So there's a Haggadah assembled from the sayings. It's called the Haggadah Shel Pesach of Belz, and the main parish is called Imrei Kodesh, which has a Likud, is an anthology of the Hasidic interpretations on Pesach and the Haggadah. So they have a minhag. It's an amazing thing. They have even certain things in halacha which are discussed. I'll mention the halachic thing. You know that in halacha at the Seder, you have to eat shiurim. Shira, matzah, kazayas, mora, kazayas. So, supposing you only have chrein, you have horseradish. That's the only type of bitter herb you have. So, al pidin, you have to eat a kazayas. Now, try to eat a kazayas. Let's say, even if you go the minimum shear of half an egg. I'm not talking about the night of Yehuda's shear, and eat it slowly. You can't swallow it. Bola mora lo yotza, the Gemara says. You have to taste it. Matzah, bola matzah, yotza. But bola mora lo yotza. You have to chew it and taste it. Now, my father, all of a sudden, used to say that his father, who I named after, who was a Volozhin, a Talmud, so they at the Seder, there in Kamenetz, he used to practically faint. When he took the matzah, he passed out. That when he ate the maror. And he said he took a knadel of the maror and ate it just the way it said. But the Belzer it's brought, and I want to discuss it with a Belzer Chassid in Borough Park, also about that. You know who are Belzer Chassidim? They're famous Beichei Sforim, you know, Beagleisen. Beagleisen are Belzer, real dynamo. I knew the old man, Yakir, who was a great Bucky in Sforim, a real Belzer. So the children who run the store, the grandchildren, I know who's running it now, they know all about the Belzer. They're devoted Belzer Chassidim, though some of them look very modern. Anyhow, so they had their minhag at the Seder was just to take a little bit less than a shear, like when they made kairach. They put a little smear. In fact, my maternal grandfather, my mother's father, we used to eat the Seder as a child. We used to Seder in his house in Newark, New Jersey. So when he divided up the Torah, we used to say, he smeared a little of the actual horseradish on the matzah, so we ate it. There never was a shear. So I used to wonder, I came to yeshiva, we were never yotze. So it seems that the Belzer had al pi lomdus, that something which is a dover chorif, and there's a raya to that in Shulchan Aruch from the Taz, when the Taz talks about a shear of a case for a bracha achreina on whiskey, on yash, he says since it's not a full shear of the rabbis, but since it's a dover chorif, it's like a shear, they use that svara. So that's, bells had lomdus and everything else. So here's a minute, yes?
I saw this same svara appears in the tshuvas of the Kosher Glover.
Yeah, well, he defends it. Yeah, that's where he discusses it.
The Eretz
He
Tzvi.
brings out the Eretz Tzvi. That's where he discusses. In fact, when I discussed it on Pesach in the shul, I always mentioned the Eretz Tzvi, how he's masber the Belzer. The Belzer alone don't know how to be masber, but that's what they do. They don't ask questions. That's a good chassid. Never ask a kasha on it ever. They used to say in Borough Park, you could ask a kasha on Tesrus, on the Rambam, on the Achreinim, but on the Rebbe you can't ask any kashas. That's the rule. So that's a different story.
That's the makor from Mekilim to also make kiddush on a schnapps.
What?
That's the makor also for us to make kiddush on a schnapps. Some people make kiddush on a.
Yeah, that's their svara. They used to make kiddush on yash, on banfen, on schnapps. They used to take just a shot glass and make kiddush on it because it's a dover chorov. That was based on that whole idea. They bring that down to Tamim and Hagen. There's some daily posting. The Marsham talks about it and others that did that. So that shows, the kayach of bells. So here's a minig that is mentioned over here. They have a minig that before Manishtana, the one who is supposed to ask the questions, what does he do? He claps. You know about it?
Yeah.
I'm interested in knowing. I never heard that minig.
From the bells on the bottom of the Kohen Gadol's me'il.
Yeah.
It made noise.
Nishma,
People got excited when they heard the Kohen Gadol.
That's a nishma kelo b'voya l'kodesh.
That's why they do
That's
it
supposed to be a
before.
mark, in the Agada, he brings kaf el kaf.
Yeah.
Get a patch, just one clap. What's the significance of that? So one of the interpretations, which I like very much, is kaf el kaf means hand to hand. What is it trying to say? So one of the interpretations that you have from one of the Belzer Rabbeim, I think it is from Yisachar Dov. There was Sholem Belzer, Yisachar Dov Belzer, and then the last one before the present one was Rav Aaron, who survived the Holocaust and came to Israel and was nifter in Eretz Yisrael. So whatever it was, what is the significance of Pesach? And we're asking all these questions is, what was the purpose of Yetzias Mitzrayim? Actually, he doesn't quote the Ramban, but if you look at the Hakdama of the Ramban on Shmos, he says, what is Shmos? It's called the Sefer HaGeula. When is the Geula of the Jewish people? Not when they came out of Mitzrayim, when they came out Har Sinai, when they were Makabel the Torah, because it says that you're going to tavdu, once you come out of Mitzrayim, tavas Elokim, tachas Orazeh, you're going to worship Hashem, you get the Torah. That's the Madrei, that's the full idea of the Exodus, of Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's a festival of freedom, which I'm adding. So what's the significance of Kaf? Kaf is a hand, as if to say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kaviyachol, gave into the hand of Moshe Rabbeinu the Torah. Al Yad Moshe, where it said, Zos HaTorah Shem Moshe Lifnei B'nei Yisrael. The rest of the pasuk, there's no such thing in the rest of the pasuk, The pasuk is Zos HaTorah Shem Moshe Lifnei B'nei Yisrael. That's when you're supposed to stop when they make Hagba. Others say Al Pi, Moshe, Al Pi Hashem, B'yad Moshe. That's not, in fact, the Chaim Volozhiner was makbid, don't say those words, it's not a pasuk. But the reality is that's what happened. HaKadosh Baruch Hu literally gave, as if to say, using imagery of hand, from hand to Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah. So this is what the whole Indian of Pesach is. The resulting aspect of Yetzias Mitzrayim should become to Torah. So that's one kaf to the other kaf. I add, think about this, remember I gave a shiur at the Kollel dinner about Mesorah. What is Mesorah and what is the Kinyan of Mesorah? Those who are learning in the Daf Yomi, they're talking about Kinyan Mesorah, Okono from the Pasuk, Miyad Liyad. That's where Mesorah comes. It's not something far off distant, it's a meeting from hand to hand, from one generation to the other. That's what Mesorah is. And Mesorah also represents, this is what I added to mention, Kinyan. You make a Kinyan, you acquire, there's such a thing as Kinyan Torah. You have to acquire it, you have to take possession of it. And I added something else, when it talks about, you read it in the Torah, first day of Pesach, Mishchu ukulechem, Mishchu yedechem, ukulechem es Pesach. So Mishchu, the Medrash says, or Rashi quotes, Mishchu yedechem mi Avodah Zorah. Go away, detach yourself from Avodah Zorah. I like to take interpretation. Mishchu means make a kinyan. It's a kinyan Mashiach. Make a kinyan on the values of Pesach, on the Korban Pesach, and everything that you do in Yiddishkeit. In fact, the expression that you find in Gemara Kedushin, when it says, "Im poga b'chol manuvel zeh," if you meet the Yetzer Hara there, Moshcheu yedil beis hamedrash. Take him in. What does Moshcheu? Doesn't mean just pull him into. Take hold of him. You have to be able to control. Once you control the Yetzer Hara, doesn't mean you eradicate him. You control him, take him into the Beis HaMedrash. That's where you're able to control him when you have the values of Torah. So here, with this patch, with this clapping and so forth, is talking about everything that we're doing is the Mesorah of Torah, of Pesach, how we observe it, and so forth. That's the concept of that. I think our time is just about up. There's so many things we can talk about. There's just one more little tidbit, which I didn't jot down now, but from years before, and it happens all the time. By the Korban Pesach, they sprinkled the dam on the mezuzos and on the mashkov, the lintel above, as a simon for the malchamavos, whatever that indicates. So it says, "V'hoya hadam lachem." So there are meforshim that explain, and it's so real. If you Jews, if you're going to give of your blood, if you're going to sacrifice yourself for an ideal, it should be for the Jewish people. Don't just sacrifice yourself for others and not for the Jewish people. And what I mean is this, like in a lot of the radical movements, or some democratic movements, who are in the forefront of a lot of these movements?
Yeah.
Jews. Like in the civil rights movements, there were fellows that went down to the South and were killed, were murdered, they marched in the front, and all of that. When it came to Jewish causes, or for Eretz Yisrael, where were they? Oy Adam Lechem, how about Lechem? How about taking care of Jewish values? Unfortunately, all of these type of situations of gay rights and so forth, who do you see in the front of that? Jews. It's very, very shocking all the time, and they're sacrificing themselves for that. What it comes about Eretz Yisrael or on the college campuses or so forth, sometimes they're marching together with the Palestinians. Oy Adam Lechem, how about doing something in behalf of the Jewish people? So that's the message, part of the Korban Pesach. That should be the dedication.
Shikayach. Thank you so much. Shikayach.
Thank you so much.